The Entity Framework provides a lot of mapping capabilities, everything from doing inheritance where we've got a table per hierarchy or table per type, all the way down to the number of entities for a single table. You can do stored procedures, and you can work with different abstract entities. You can tie in different spatial types. There's enums, there's query views. Pretty much a very vast plethora of options are available to us for how we go out and build out our mapping capabilities, particularly when we're doing the design model first or the database first. Now, to switch gears a little bit, let's talk about what is in for code first. One of the really neat things that the Entity Framework provides is this thing called data migrations. And in the code first model, what we do is we start out with a set of classes and objects, and we add to it the database, the EF model, which then can iterate against the database and give us the objects that we need. It's part of the code first pattern includes a thing called data migrations, which allows us to automate how that database gets created. What we do is we create our POCO classes, and then we generate the data context, and then using the package manager, we can then enable migrations and then sync between the classes in the database. We can roll back and work with Delta change scripts are generated so that we can hand that off to our DBAs and then be able to build our applications. So let's take a look at that. So now that we've seen how we can build Entity Framework and use the model first approach, now let's take a look at the code first. To work with the code first, generally you start out with a new project here, and I'm going to create just an ASP.NET web app, but we're going to do this as our code first. So I'm going to call this my EF code first. And I'm going to do this using the data migrations that we talked about. So I'm going to pull up an MVC data type. I could add the web API support so we can do web API controllers as well. Go ahead and say OK. And this is now going to go out and it's going to create a project for us using the MVC framework. And essentially what we end up with is something where we've got a number of different models that are created for us. We have controllers. Controllers describe the interaction with objects. And then you have views. And the views get created for each different page and item that we're going to go out and look at. What I want to do is I want to go out and create a model, but I'm going to do it with just a simple class. So I'm going to go down over here. I'm going to say add a new class, and I'm going to call this my course data context, course data. And what I want to do is I want to create something that's going to map out some course information for me. So with just a simple class like this, you'll see I've got my course data. Let me go ahead and call this course. In my course, I'm going to have some simple things like add a property for my string. We'll call this course name, title. We'll have one for a string for description. And then I've got another class that I'm going to create for my instructor. I'll make this also public. Now the instructor is going to have a property for their name, and we'll have a property for their maybe for their blog. And I should probably have a course ID on here, so I'm going to have a property here for this. I'll call my course ID. And I'll do one for my instructor. Now, I've created these very simple classes. What I can do with this is I can then simply build the project, make sure everything's working. I'm also going to set this to be my startup project so that I know that it's going to be there. So I'm going to right-click here and say set as my startup project. And then I can go up and I can say I want to create a controller for my courses. So I go and say add, and in MVC I've got a controller type object, so I'm going to add that, and I'm going to add an MVC controller with views using the Entity Framework. Say OK, add, and we'll call this the course controller. The neat thing about this is it's actually going to create some scaffolding for me for going out and interacting with this course object. So I'm going to come down here and we're going to pull up our course objects. There's my course and my EF code first models. And the data context is going to be something that we're going to create new. So I'm going to go out and create this, and we'll call this my EF data context. Demo EF data context, and add that. Now, click on Add, and it's going to then go through and do some scaffolding or creating some views and some other code for me, including the course EF data context class. Now, the course EF data, the demo EF data context class is actually pretty simple too. It implements this interface called the DB context. And with that context, it then has something that's going to go out and create a base data context for me, which then is going to go out and create this thing called a DB set. Now, a DB set is a collection of objects that maps out to a table. So courses is going to map out to this course, and it's got a get and set on what that looks like. It also created the course controller, and the course controller has a controller in MVC has a bunch of RESTful things. So if I were to go out and browse to this application and just go to the course path, it's going to go out to the index action and then return back a list of courses in a view. If I go and I put in a particular ID, so I go details/5, then that is actually going to pull back that particular course for that specific one. We also have the ability to create and edit and do all kinds of good things. But what's interesting is that if I take this project and I run it, it's going to go out and it builds this. Now, one of the things you may have noticed is that I didn't specify a database. That's okay, so no database defined, but I can go up here and I can type in course, and it opens up the page that it has scaffolded out in the view for me for all the list of courses. Give it a second, and it takes a little bit of time the first time it runs because it's actually doing some magic for us. If I click on Create New and I type in the course, say Intro to .NET, and intro course that shows what you need to know. When I create this, it's going to actually add it to a list of data somewhere. And if I click on details, you see there's the details for it. If I go back to the list, this is actually showing up inside of somewhere. Where did that actually get created? Well, let's stop this and I'll show you. The place where it gets created, if I go into my web config, is it has connected up to the local database for my demo EF data context. So it automatically created for me this demo EF data context file. In fact, if I go up under this project and I say show all files, you'll see that there's a demo or a data directory, and if I double click on this, it actually has the demo database created with the course information here. And if I were to expand that out again and take a look at the courses, you'll see there's my course, my title, description. And what's interesting is that in my model right now, I have courses. If I add another controller here and say add a controller, and in this time let's add a EF controller for my instructor controller, and say my class is going to be the instructor class. We'll add it to the same model, say add. And if we run this again, now I can go up here and I can type in instructor, and this is going to scaffold its way out and go to see where this would be running, except it doesn't know where the instructor table exists because it never got created. So it can't create that instructors for us. So what it says is maybe you should be using this thing called Code First Migrations to update the database. And if you look at this and if you go out to that link, it'll actually take you to an instruction that will show you what you need to do. I already know how to do that, so I'm going to do that for you now. And what this is we're going to use the framework to actually do a data migration for us. If I go under the tools and I come down to where I've got my library package manager and I open up the package manager console, this is working with NuGet packages for this particular solution. Go out, set this as my Code First default project. I can come down here and I can say enable migrations. And when I do this, it's going to add the componentry it needs to be able to go out and generate for me the specifics for doing the data changes on the database. Now, one of the things is I created this with my model. There's also the account view model that was already there. There's also identity models. So in order to enable migrations for this specific app, I'm going to go and I'm going to say do this for my demo data context. So use this, enable migrations, and then I'm going to specify the data context that we're running this on. So come down here, paste that in, and now my context type name is going to map out to that EF data context. And what this does is it's going to add a folder for my migrations, and it's going to create a configuration file that will describe the initial setup of the database. You'll see here's where we've got a seed that's going to go out and create the context for our objects. I can actually put in some sample data. So for instance, if I wanted to, I could say context.add or .courses.add or update, and then I'm going to pass in a new course. And I'm going to create the course with the title being Intro to Visual Studio 2013. And I might have a description, great course on VS. And then I could have another one, new course. And we'll give this title is equal to exploring ASP.NET. And then we'll put a description. Yep, good stuff. But I can put some seed data into this that will then allow me to actually populate the database ahead of time. And if it already exists in the database, it'll just update it. Otherwise, it'll insert a new one. Now, the code migrations get enabled. And once we do that, if we want to actually generate and deploy this, is we go into the package manager, and I say add migration. And we'll give this a name, call it initial create. And it's going to go out, compare the database against what we've got in our classes, and then identify any changes that need to happen. And then I can call update database to actually push the changes out. Now that is going to go through and it'll say, okay, well, here's where it's going to go out. It's going to run the seed method. If you run this with a -verbose, we could actually see the actual SQL statements getting generated. So there's no pending changes at this point. But where it is it's in the migrations. So there's actually been 2 migrations that we've created. The first one is the initial create. And in this, it's going out and it's creating the instructor table. It's adding some variables. So we've got an int that's going to be a nullable for an identity on the instructor ID. Plus it's got the name and the blog. And it's got a primary key set up for the instructor ID. We also, on the second one, we've got the courses being created. So the initial create goes through and creates these with a timestamp on there. We can go through and we could actually use this to generate a script if we want to be able to push this out to the database. But the neat thing is that now that we've got this, if I go out and take a look at the database and I refresh this, I'll find that my courses has been added, my instructors are sitting here. In my courses, maybe one of the things I need to do is to make sure that we've got something that's going to allow us to give a rating to a course. So, you know, a course has got this, but maybe we want to have a property for my rating. And I also might want to have a navigation property saying that a course is associated with an instructor. So there's an instructor here. So I might have a public virtual instructor with a get and a set. And I might have on the instructor a list of courses. But by doing this, we can make the changes in the code and then have that reflected back into the model by using the migrations to actually package that up and push it out for us. So let's go ahead and let's add another migration. Related. And then we can call update database. And we'll say script. And so then this is going to go out and it creates a script that then has the changes. So it actually creates the script for us and then takes care of the migration of data and updating the key in the migration history. So we got the strong key added. But it allows us to then take this script, then we could cut and paste it and run it. We could also apply it to other environments if we needed to, or deploy it out.